There comes a stage in life where wisdom replaces urgency, clarity replaces confusion, and peace becomes more valuable than excitement. After 50 and 60, life isn't about chasing validation or proving worth anymore. It's about alignment, emotional health, and choosing what truly adds meaning. And for many men at this stage, having a girlfriend, at least in the traditional sense, may no longer be the right choice. Here's why. By the time a man reaches his 50s or 60s, he is no longer emotionally inexperienced or unaware. He has lived through enough relationships to understand how deeply the past shapes the present. Every long-term connection leaves an imprint, whether it ended gently or painfully. And those imprints do not fade simply because time has passed. Emotional baggage at this stage is not about small misunderstandings or temporary insecurities. It is about deeply ingrained patterns formed over decades. These patterns influence how trust is given, how conflict is handled, and how vulnerability is expressed, often without conscious awareness. At this age, most people carry unresolved emotional wounds. Past marriages may have ended in disappointment or betrayal. Long relationships may have dissolved without closure, and sacrifices made for love may still feel unrecognized. These experiences quietly shape expectations in new relationships. A man may enter a new connection hoping for companionship, but instead finds himself constantly guarding his emotions, anticipating disappointment, or interpreting neutral situations through the lens of past hurt. Emotional reactions become less about the present moment and more about old memories that were never fully healed. Women at this stage of life also bring their own emotional histories. They may carry pain from broken commitments, loss, neglect, or years of feeling unseen or undervalued. When two people with heavy emotional histories come together, the relationship can quickly turn into a meeting of unresolved stories rather than a fresh start. Small disagreements can trigger disproportionate reactions because they touch old wounds. What might have been a simple conversation becomes emotionally charged, not because of what is happening now, but because of what happened years ago. There is also a reduced tolerance for emotional struggle. In younger years, emotional intensity often feels exciting, even meaningful. Drama is mistaken for passion, and conflict is viewed as part of growth. After 50 or 60, that tolerance fades. Emotional exhaustion sets in faster, and patience for recurring misunderstandings grows thinner. Instead of feeling energized by connection, a man may feel drained by the constant emotional navigation required to maintain harmony. The effort to manage another person's emotional needs while also managing one's own can feel overwhelming rather than rewarding. Another challenge is the rigidity of emotional habits. With age, people become more fixed in how they communicate, how they cope, and how they protect themselves. Compromise becomes harder not because of selfishness, but because emotional habits have been reinforced over decades. A man may be used to emotional independence and struggle with emotional demands. A partner may seek reassurance or closeness in ways that feel intrusive rather than comforting. These differences are not easily adjusted at this stage, leading to frustration on both sides. Emotional baggage also affects trust. Past betrayals make people cautious, sometimes overly so. Innocent actions can be questioned, intentions can be doubted, and reassurance may never feel sufficient. This creates an emotional imbalance where one person feels constantly evaluated and the other never feels fully secure. Over time, this dynamic erodes peace and replaces it with quiet tension. What was meant to be companionship becomes a source of emotional vigilance. At this stage of life, many men have worked hard to achieve emotional stability. They value calm mornings, predictable routines, and mental clarity. Introducing a relationship burdened by emotional history can disrupt that balance. Instead of offering comfort and support, the relationship becomes another emotional responsibility. The realization slowly forms that peace is fragile, and protecting it requires careful choices about who is allowed close enough to influence emotional well-being. By the time a man reaches his 50s or 60s, freedom no longer feels like a luxury. It feels like a necessity. After decades of responsibilities, compromises, and obligations, personal freedom becomes deeply tied to emotional well-being. It is not about avoiding connection, but about finally having control over time, energy, and choices. At this stage, freedom represents the ability to live intentionally rather than reactively, and anything that threatens that balance can feel unsettling. Earlier in life, relationships are often built around merging lives. Schedules blend, decisions are shared, and personal desires are frequently adjusted to maintain harmony. When a man is younger, this compromise feels natural and even necessary. After 50 or 60, however, the cost of compromise becomes more apparent. Every adjustment requires emotional energy, and the return on that investment is no longer guaranteed. A girlfriend, even with good intentions, introduces expectations that reshape how a man lives his daily life. Time becomes more precious with age. A man may value slow mornings, quiet evenings, and the freedom to change plans without explanation. A relationship subtly alters this rhythm. There are check-ins, commitments, and unspoken obligations that come with emotional attachment. Even simple choices, like how to spend a weekend or when to travel, often require consideration of another person's feelings. Over time, this can feel less like companionship and more like negotiation. There is also the freedom of emotional space. Many men at this stage have learned to regulate their emotions independently. They are comfortable with silence, solitude, and reflection. A girlfriend may seek emotional engagement, reassurance, or frequent communication, not out of neediness, but out of a desire for closeness. However, what feels like closeness to one person can feel like intrusion to another. The expectation to constantly share emotional states or be emotionally available can slowly erode a man's sense of inner calm. Financial freedom also plays a role. By this age, many men have structured their lives to align with their financial goals, whether that means simplifying expenses, planning for retirement, or enjoying the fruits of years of hard work. A relationship can introduce financial expectations, shared spending, or pressure to maintain a certain lifestyle. Even when finances are not explicitly discussed, the presence of a partner often influences spending habits and long-term planning, reducing the sense of autonomy. Another aspect of freedom is identity. After 50 or 60, a man often has a clear sense of who he is and how he wants to live. He may have spent years refining his values, routines, and boundaries. Entering a relationship can subtly challenge that identity. There may be pressure to adjust habits, soften boundaries, or revisit compromises he has already outgrown. The relationship may not demand change outright, but the emotional gravity of closeness naturally pulls people toward adaptation. Freedom at this stage is also about mental simplicity. Life has already been complex, filled with career pressures, family responsibilities, and emotional challenges. Many men intentionally reduce complexity as they age. A girlfriend, regardless of how compatible, introduces another emotional system to manage. There are moods, needs, misunderstandings, and emotional cycles that require attention. Even healthy relationships require work, and that work can feel heavier when peace has become the primary goal. Ultimately, personal freedom after 50 or 60 is less about independence and more about preservation. It is about protecting the life that has been carefully built, the routines that support mental and physical health, and the quiet satisfaction that comes from living on one's own terms. When freedom becomes more valuable than romance, the idea of sacrificing it, even partially, can feel like too high a price. As men move into their 50s and 60s, there is a natural and unavoidable shift in what truly matters. The drive to prove oneself, to compete, to chase external validation slowly fades, replaced by a deeper desire for meaning, balance, and inner peace. Life is no longer measured by milestones achieved or relationships acquired, but by the quality of each day and the sense of alignment within it. This change in priorities often makes traditional romantic relationships feel less relevant and, at times, misaligned. Health becomes a central focus. Physical energy is no longer unlimited, and mental clarity is valued more than emotional intensity. Sleep, nutrition, stress management, and routine play a significant role in how a man feels and functions. A relationship that introduces emotional turbulence, unpredictability, or constant negotiation can quietly undermine these priorities. Even small amounts of stress can have a noticeable impact on health at this stage, making peace not just a preference, but a necessity. Purpose also takes on a new meaning. Earlier in life, purpose may have been tied to career advancement, providing for family, or achieving status. After 50 or 60, purpose often becomes more personal and reflective. It may involve mentoring, creative pursuits, spiritual exploration, or simply living in a way that feels authentic. A girlfriend may unintentionally pull attention away from these pursuits. Time and emotional energy that could be invested in meaningful projects can become absorbed by relationship maintenance. There is also a growing appreciation for simplicity. Complexity that once felt stimulating now feels draining. Men at this stage often seek to streamline their lives, reducing unnecessary obligations and emotional clutter. Traditional relationships can reintroduce complexity in subtle ways. There are expectations around availability, emotional engagement, shared decision-making, and future planning. Even when these expectations are reasonable, they can conflict with a desire for a simpler, more focused life. Legacy begins to matter more than romance. Men start thinking about the impact they leave behind, the values they pass on, and the memories they create. This legacy is not always about children or wealth, but about integrity, wisdom, and the way life is lived. Relationships that do not align with this deeper sense of purpose can feel distracting rather than enriching. The question becomes less about companionship and more about contribution. Emotional peace becomes a priority over emotional excitement. In younger years, emotional highs and lows are often mistaken for passion. With age comes the understanding that consistency and calm are far more valuable. A relationship that brings uncertainty, insecurity, or recurring emotional challenges can feel like a step backward. Men become less willing to tolerate emotional patterns that disturb their sense of equilibrium. Independence also gains a new dimension. It is no longer about proving self-sufficiency, but about honoring personal rhythm and boundaries. A man may have established routines that support his well-being, from morning habits to evening rituals. A relationship can disrupt these rhythms, even unintentionally. Adjusting to another person's needs may feel less like compromise and more like loss. There is also a heightened awareness of time. With fewer years ahead than behind, choices are made more deliberately. Men become selective about where they invest their energy. A relationship must offer genuine alignment and ease to justify the investment. Anything that feels emotionally taxing or misaligned with current priorities is quietly filtered out. This shift in priorities does not mean a rejection of connection, but a refinement of it. Men at this stage are not avoiding love. They are protecting what matters most. When peace, purpose, health, and simplicity rise to the top, traditional romantic relationships often no longer fit naturally into the life being intentionally created. As men move into their 50s and 60s, their relationship with emotional risk changes in a fundamental way. In earlier years, emotional risk often feels acceptable, even necessary. Heartbreak is viewed as a temporary setback, and starting over feels possible because time seems abundant. With age, however, the emotional cost of uncertainty becomes much heavier. The desire for stability begins to outweigh the desire for emotional excitement, and risk is no longer taken lightly. Emotional investment at this stage is deeper and more cautious. A man knows himself better and understands what emotional disruption can do to his sense of balance. Entering a romantic relationship means opening the door to potential disappointment, misunderstanding, or loss. Even when a relationship begins with promise, there is always the possibility that it may not last. The emotional toll of another ending can feel overwhelming rather than instructive, making the risk feel disproportionate to the reward. Recovery from emotional pain also changes with age. Emotional wounds tend to heal more slowly, not because of weakness, but because of accumulated experience. Each disappointment adds to a long emotional history, making new pain feel heavier. Where a younger man might bounce back with optimism, an older man may find himself retreating inward, protecting what emotional stability remains. The thought of enduring another emotionally taxing chapter can be enough to discourage deep involvement altogether. There is also the risk of emotional dependency. At this stage, many men have established independence and emotional self-sufficiency. A romantic relationship can subtly shift that balance. Relying on a partner for emotional comfort, companionship, or validation creates vulnerability. If that relationship ends or becomes unstable, the emotional void can feel profound. The risk is not just heartbreak, but the disruption of a carefully constructed emotional foundation. Trust becomes another significant factor. Past betrayals or disappointments shape how trust is given. Even when a partner appears trustworthy, lingering doubt can persist. This creates internal conflict where a man wants connection but fears vulnerability. The emotional energy spent managing this tension can outweigh the joy the relationship provides. Constantly assessing intentions and guarding emotions becomes exhausting. There is also the emotional risk of misalignment. Two people may care for each other but want different things from life. At this stage, compromise feels less flexible. When goals, values, or lifestyles do not align, the relationship becomes a source of quiet stress. The emotional effort required to bridge these gaps can feel unsustainable. The reward of companionship may not justify the ongoing emotional labor. Another overlooked risk is the impact on mental clarity. Emotional turbulence affects focus, sleep, and overall well-being. Men who have worked hard to create a peaceful mental environment may find that relationship stress reintroduces anxiety and distraction. Even minor conflicts can linger longer, occupying mental space that was once calm. The cost of this disruption becomes increasingly noticeable. Loss also carries a different weight later in life. Whether through breakup or circumstances beyond control, the potential for loss is real. Facing emotional separation after building attachment can feel deeply unsettling. The fear is not just about being alone, but about the emotional energy required to rebuild a sense of normalcy. For many men, protecting emotional stability becomes a priority that outweighs the uncertain rewards of romantic involvement. At this stage, emotional safety often feels more valuable than emotional intensity. The highs of romance may no longer compensate for the lows that accompany risk. When measured carefully, the emotional cost of potential disruption can exceed the comfort and connection offered by a girlfriend, making the risk feel unjustifiable. By the time a man reaches his 50s or 60s, he has already experienced enough relationships to understand how unspoken expectations shape romantic dynamics. Traditional relationships often come with predefined roles, routines, and assumptions about how partners should behave. Even when these expectations are not openly discussed, they exist beneath the surface and quietly influence the relationship. At this stage of life, these pressures can feel unnecessary and burdensome rather than comforting or stabilizing. There is often an assumption that a girlfriend should play a central role in daily life. This can mean regular communication, shared schedules, and emotional availability that goes beyond what a man may be comfortable offering. What is seen as normal in traditional relationships can feel intrusive when a man values solitude and independence. The pressure is rarely aggressive, but it is persistent. Over time, the feeling of being emotionally accountable to someone else can create subtle resistance and fatigue. Traditional relationships also carry expectations around future planning. Conversations about long-term commitment, shared living arrangements, and emotional security naturally arise. For a man in his later years, these discussions may feel misaligned with his current goals. He may have already established his lifestyle and may not wish to restructure it to fit another person's vision of togetherness. The pressure to define the relationship can create tension, even when both people care for each other. There is also the expectation of emotional performance. In traditional romantic roles, men are often expected to provide emotional stability, reassurance, and strength. While these qualities are valuable, constantly maintaining them can be draining. At this stage of life, a man may want the freedom to be emotionally neutral, reflective, or even withdrawn without feeling that he is failing a partner. The obligation to meet emotional expectations can feel more like a responsibility than an expression of love. Social expectations add another layer of pressure. Friends, family, and society often project their own ideas of what a relationship should look like. There may be assumptions about companionship, holidays, public appearances, and shared milestones. Navigating these external expectations can feel exhausting, especially when a man is content with a quieter, more private life. The relationship becomes not just about two people, but about managing perceptions and obligations. Financial expectations can also quietly emerge. Even in modern relationships, there is often an assumption about shared expenses, gift giving, and lifestyle compatibility. A man who has carefully structured his finances may feel pressure to spend in ways that do not align with his priorities. This pressure is rarely explicit, but it influences decisions and creates internal conflict. What begins as generosity can slowly turn into obligation. Traditional relationships often demand consistency in ways that limit flexibility. There is an expectation to maintain regular contact, participate in shared routines, and prioritize the relationship above other interests. For a man who values autonomy, this can feel restrictive. The freedom to change plans, pursue personal interests, or spend time alone becomes compromised by the expectation of availability. At this stage, many men have worked hard to simplify their lives. They have learned that peace often comes from reducing obligations rather than adding them. Traditional relationship structures, with their layered expectations and roles, can reintroduce complexity that feels unnecessary. The pressure to conform to a predefined model of romance can overshadow the genuine connection that might otherwise exist. When expectations outweigh ease, relationships lose their appeal. Instead of feeling supportive, they feel demanding. For men who prioritize calm, autonomy, and emotional balance, traditional relationship pressures can become a source of stress rather than fulfillment, making the idea of maintaining such a dynamic feel counterproductive. As men reach their 50s and 60s, their understanding of connection becomes more nuanced and intentional. They begin to realize that companionship does not automatically require the structure, labels, or obligations of a traditional romantic relationship. Earlier in life, companionship and commitment are often intertwined, almost inseparable. Being close to someone usually means defining the relationship, setting expectations, and committing to a shared emotional path. With age, however, many men recognize that connection can exist in far simpler and more flexible forms. Companionship at this stage is often about shared presence rather than shared lives. It may mean enjoying meaningful conversations, spending time together occasionally, or simply knowing there is someone who understands and respects personal boundaries. This kind of connection feels lighter and more natural. It does not demand constant availability or emotional performance. Instead of revolving around expectations, it grows out of mutual respect and ease. Many men discover that friendships can offer a depth of companionship they once overlooked. Long conversations, shared interests, laughter, and emotional support do not have to come from a girlfriend. Friendships often lack the pressure of romantic validation, making them emotionally safer. There is room for honesty without fear of disappointing a partner or failing to meet romantic expectations. This freedom allows companionship to feel nourishing rather than demanding. There is also value in companionship that is situational rather than permanent. Traveling with someone, attending events together, or sharing hobbies can provide connection without long-term obligation. These interactions allow men to enjoy the benefits of social and emotional connection while still maintaining control over their time and energy. The absence of commitment does not reduce the quality of the experience. In many cases, it enhances it by removing pressure. Emotional intimacy can also exist without exclusivity. Deep conversations, mutual understanding, and emotional presence do not require a formal relationship. In fact, emotional intimacy often flourishes when there is no fear of loss or expectation of permanence. When two people connect without the weight of commitment, they are often more authentic, less guarded, and more present. This creates a sense of closeness that feels genuine rather than conditional. Another important realization is that solitude itself can be a form of companionship. Many men learn to enjoy their own presence, finding fulfillment in quiet routines, reflection, and independence. This self-connection reduces the need to seek validation or comfort from a romantic partner. When a man is content in his own company, any external companionship becomes a choice rather than a necessity. The idea that life must include a girlfriend to feel complete begins to lose its power. Men recognize that fulfillment comes from balance, purpose, and peace rather than relationship status. Companionship becomes something to enjoy when it aligns naturally, not something to pursue at the cost of well-being. This shift allows men to remain open to connection without feeling bound by traditional definitions. Without commitment, there is also less fear. Fear of disappointment, fear of loss, and fear of emotional upheaval all diminish when the stakes are lower. Companionship becomes lighter, more flexible, and more adaptable to life's changes. Men can enjoy connection without worrying about where it is heading or what it must become. Ultimately, the realization that companionship does not require commitment brings a sense of emotional freedom. It allows men to redefine connection on their own terms, honoring their need for peace, autonomy, and simplicity. At this stage of life, that freedom often feels like the most meaningful form of fulfillment.